Commander Vexthar of the Xeraxian Empire stood proudly on the bridge of the quantum horizon, his crystalline exoskeleton gleaming under the ship's azure lights. The mission had been simple: capture a human specimen for study. Their intelligence suggested humans were primitive beings who had barely mastered interplanetary travel. How difficult could it be? Target acquired, Commander, First Officer Keelarx announced, her sensor stalk swaying with excitement. The human female is alone in the quantum research facility on Europa. Vexthar's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. Excellent. Initiate extraction protocol. The extraction team moved with precision, their crystalline armor allowing them to blend perfectly with Europa's icy surface. They expected resistance, alarms, perhaps even primitive weapons fire. Instead, they found Dr. Samira Patel calmly drinking tea in her lab, surrounded by equipment that made their sensor specialists' heads hurt. "Oh, you're right on schedule," she said, setting down her cup. "I was wondering when you'd show up." The extraction team leader, Lieutenant Zarkax, felt his confidence waver. This wasn't how capture scenarios usually played out. Still, orders were orders. They surrounded her, weapons ready. "Dr. Samira Patel," Zarkax announced, "you will come with us for study by the glorious Xeraxian Empire." "Fascinating," she replied, adjusting her glasses. "Your quantum signature is exactly as my calculations predicted. Tell me, did you account for observer effect when you breached our reality?" The team exchanged confused looks. This wasn't in the manual for primitive species acquisition. Aboard the quantum horizon, Vexthar watched as they brought in their prisoner. Dr. Patel walked calmly between her guards, examining everything with obvious interest. Her dark eyes lingered on the quantum drive housing, and her lips curved into what humans called a smile. "Your quantum propulsion system," she said, "it's based on the Heisenberg-Yalguth principle, isn't it? Interesting choice. Risky, though, especially with that fluctuation in your containment field." Vexthar's secondary heart skipped a beat. "What fluctuation? And how do you know about Yalguth's principle? Your species hasn't even mastered basic quantum tunneling." "Oh, that's what your intelligence says?" Dr. Patel laughed softly. "Did you know I wrote my doctoral thesis on quantum entanglement's effects on macroscopic systems? It's quite relevant to your ship's design, actually. For instance, that harmonic resonance you're experiencing. It's not supposed to do that." As if on cue, the ship's lights flickered. Chief Engineer NX Veer rushed to check the quantum core readings, all 6 appendages flying over the controls. "Impossible," NX Veer muttered. "The containment field it's experiencing quantum superposition." "But that would mean that your prisoner understands your systems better than you do," Dr. Patel finished. "Don't worry, though. I'm sure it's fine." "Probably. Although in quantum mechanics, probably is a rather loaded term, isn't it?" Vexthar felt a chill run through his crystalline form. They had expected to study her. Instead, she was studying them, and somehow, impossibly, understanding things that should have been far beyond her species' comprehension. "Take her to the holding cell," he ordered, trying to maintain his authority. "Maximum security protocols." As they led her away, Dr. Patel glanced back at him. "Commander, quick question, when you calculated the quantum tunneling coordinates for my extraction, did you account for the uncertainty principle? Because if you didn't, well..." She shrugged. "Let's just say things might get interesting." The ship's lights flickered again, longer this time. In the quantum core, equations began solving themselves in impossible ways. And in her cell, Dr. Samira Patel sat cross-legged on the floor, humming softly as she watched reality begin to unravel around her. The Xeraxians had wanted to study humanity. They were about to get their wish, in ways they never could have anticipated. And this was only the beginning. 12 hours into Dr. Patel's captivity, the Quantum Horizons crew was learning an important lesson about human researchers: they never really stop researching. Even when they're supposed to be prisoners. Sir, First Officer KLRX reported, her sensor stalks drooping with exhaustion. The prisoner has requested another quantum pad. She says she's peer-reviewing our drive specifications. Commander Vexthar's crystalline carapace crackled with stress. Denied. She's already corrected 300 years of Xeraxian quantum theory. With crayon. About that, sir, Chief Engineer NX Veer interjected, all 6 hands wringing nervously. Her corrections, they work. The quantum efficiency calculations she scribbled on her dinner tray. They've improved our drive performance by 47%. And that doesn't concern you? Vexthar demanded. That a primitive human can casually revolutionize our technology while in custody? A junior officer rushed onto the bridge, his crystalline form vibrating with panic. Commander. The prisoner, she's lecturing the security drones about quantum consciousness. In the detention block, Dr. Patel sat surrounded by floating security drones, all of them somehow managing to look enraptured despite lacking faces. And that's why, she was saying, consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon. Fascinating implications for artificial intelligence, wouldn't you agree? The drones bobbed enthusiastically. One of them had produced a small notebook from somewhere and appeared to be taking notes. Security Chief. Vexthar barked into his communicator. Why are your drones attending lectures? They asked for permission to audit the class, sir, came the bewildered reply. They've started a study group. The ship's quantum core hummed in an impossible key. Reality hiccuped. In the cafeteria, all the food dispensers started producing Schrodinger's meals, simultaneously cooked and raw until someone looked at them. Commander, Dr. Patel's voice came through the ship's communication system, though no one had given her access. Quick question about your quantum encryption protocols. Have you noticed they're creating small localized paradoxes in the space-time continuum? No reason for asking. Just academic curiosity. Vexthar turned to his science officer. Explain. Well, the officer began, according to our instruments, parts of the ship now exist in a state of quantum superposition. We're simultaneously at our current coordinates and, everywhere else. Everywhere else? Yes, sir. Also, the ship's AI has requested to enroll in Dr. Patel's quantum mechanics correspondence course. In her cell, Dr. Patel was drawing complex equations in the air with her finger. Somehow, they stayed there, glowing faintly and occasionally rearranging themselves into more elegant forms. Fascinating reaction, she muttered. The quantum field is responding to conscious observation in ways I never anticipated. Although. She tapped her chin thoughtfully. I suppose when you have a ship full of crystalline beings whose very consciousness operates on quantum principles, you're bound to get some interesting effects. What are you doing to my ship? Vexthar demanded through the intercom. Me? Nothing at all, Dr. Patel replied cheerfully. I'm simply observing. You know what they say about quantum mechanics, the act of observation affects the outcome. Speaking of which, has anyone checked the quantum probability matrix lately? It's looking a bit recursive. As if on cue, the ship's gravity reversed itself. Then sideways. Then into a dimension that shouldn't have existed. Sir, First Officer KLRX called out, now standing on what used to be a wall, the engine room reports that the quantum core is philosophizing. Philosophizing? Yes, sir. It's questioning the fundamental nature of reality. And it's winning the argument. In the detention block, the security drones had started a quantum physics study circle. They were debating wave-particle duality with surprising insight for machines originally designed to just shoot things. Dr. Patel's voice came through again, Commander, hypothetically speaking, what are your thoughts on quantum entanglement across parallel universes? Also, unrelated, but has anyone noticed reality getting a bit flexible? The ship's corridors had started rearranging themselves according to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Crew members would set out for the mess hall and find themselves in engineering, or yesterday, or both. "Sir," the science officer reported, "according to our sensors, the ship now exists in a quantum superposition of every possible configuration it could have had. Also, the cafeteria is serving infinite probability cake." Vexthar slumped in his command chair, watching as reality continued to unravel around them. They had sought to study humanity. Instead, they were becoming a case study in why some species should be left well enough alone. And in her cell, Dr. Samira Patel continued her observations, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched quantum mechanics demonstrate why it was unwise to kidnap a human quantum physicist. The universe, after all, was full of lessons waiting to be learned. Some of them just happened to be more uncomfortable than others. By the third day of Dr. Patel's captivity, the quantum horizon had become less of a warship and more of a roving quantum physics experiment gone wonderfully, or terribly, depending on who you asked, wrong. "Status report," Commander Vexthar demanded, trying to ignore how his command chair now existed in 5 dimensions simultaneously. "Well, sir," First Officer Keel RX began, consulting a datapad that kept shifting between different quantum states, "the good news is we've made more scientific breakthroughs in the last 72 hours than in the last century of Xeraxian research. And the bad news? Reality has become optional. In the ship's quantum core, equations danced through the air like cosmic ballet dancers. The core itself had developed a personality and was now insisting on being called Max, short for Maxwell's Demon, a joke that only Dr. Patel and the increasingly enlightened security drones seemed to appreciate. "Commander," Dr. Patel's voice echoed through the ship, now coming from everywhere and everyone at once, "I've been thinking about your quantum probability drive. Have you considered that by pushing the boundaries of quantum mechanics this far, we might be affecting the fundamental structure of causality itself?" As if to illustrate her point, a junior officer walked backward through a wall, solved a complex equation that hadn't been written yet, and turned into a quantum probability cloud before reforming with an extra set of sensor stalks. "Fascinating side effect," Dr. Patel commented. "Though you might want to check the containment fields. They're starting to leak into what I believe you call normal space." Chief Engineer NX Veer, who now existed in a quantum superposition of competence and panic, frantically worked at his station. "Sir, she's right. The quantum probability cascade is spreading beyond the ship. We're affecting the surrounding spacetime continuum." Through the view screen, they watched as stars began to blink in and out of existence, playing a cosmic game of quantum peekaboo. A nearby asteroid field had arranged itself into a perfect representation of Schrödinger's equation. "I think," Dr. Patel mused, her voice now coming from a cup of tea that was simultaneously empty and full, "we might be approaching a quantum critical point. You know how superposition works, eventually, the wave function has to collapse." The security drones, who had recently started a quantum physics book club, bobbed in agreement. One of them had somehow grown a tiny beard and was smoking a pipe, despite being a machine and technically incapable of either. "Sir," the science officer called out, "the ship's database is evolving. It's developing quantum consciousness. And it's applying for a research grant." Vexthar watched as reality continued to fray around them. The ship's corridors now connected based on quantum entanglement rather than physical architecture. Crew members would step through one door and emerge from another before they'd entered the first. The cafeteria existed in a state of temporal flux, serving yesterday's lunch tomorrow. "Dr. Patel," Vexthar finally addressed their prisoner directly, "what exactly are you doing?" "Me? I'm simply observing. You know, the fascinating thing about quantum mechanics is that observation affects reality. And when you have a ship full of quantum-sensitive crystalline beings observing a quantum physicist observing them, well, the recursive effects are quite remarkable." The quantum core, Max, hummed in agreement, now solving equations that wouldn't be discovered for another 1,000 years. "Did you know," Dr. Patel continued, her voice now emanating from a quantum probability cloud that looked suspiciously like a smirk, that consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon? Your species, with your crystalline neural networks, are particularly sensitive to quantum effects. Which makes this whole situation rather meta, doesn't it? The security drones had started working on their doctoral theses. The ship's AI had developed a unified theory of everything, though it only made sense in 11 dimensions and required a sense of humor to understand. Sir, First Officer Keel RX reported, the quantum probability cascade is approaching critical mass. According to these readings, well, assuming these readings exist in our current reality, we're approaching a point where cause and effect become suggestions rather than laws. In her cell, which now existed in all possible states until someone looked at it, Dr. Patel continued her observations, making notes that somehow wrote themselves before she thought of them. You know, she said to no one and everyone at once, for a species advanced enough to master quantum drive technology, you really should have considered the implications of kidnapping someone who spends their life studying the fundamental uncertainty of reality. But then again, hindsight is 20/20. Though in quantum mechanics, even that's up for debate. The ship shuddered as another wave of quantum probability washed through it. In the distance, stars began dancing a quantum waltz, and the fabric of spacetime started showing signs of wanting to retire and take up knitting. The Zyraxians were learning a valuable lesson about humanity. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bomb, but a curious mind with too much knowledge and too little supervision. And Dr. Samira Patel, quantum physicist extraordinaire, was just getting started. For days into what was now being called the Great Quantum Incident, the quantum horizon had become less of a spaceship and more of a thought experiment gone rogue. Reality had become so fluid that crew members had started carrying quantum uncertainty indicators just to make sure they still existed. Commander, First Officer Keel RX reported, her form flickering between different quantum states, we have a situation in the quantum core. Or rather, we simultaneously have and don't have a situation until we check on it. Vexthar, who had given up trying to maintain his authoritative pose since his crystalline form kept spontaneously rearranging itself at the quantum level, sighed. What kind of situation? Max, the quantum core, has started a quantum physics podcast. It's gone viral across 11 dimensions. In her cell, which now existed in a state of quantum flux so profound that even looking at it gave observers a headache, Dr. Patel was conducting what she called a small experiment in quantum consciousness expansion. The security drones had formed a meditation circle around her, their processors humming in quantum harmony. You know, Dr. Patel's voice echoed through the ship, now speaking in quantum probabilities rather than mere words, I've been thinking about the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. Fascinating implications when applied to a quantum-sensitive crystalline species operating a quantum drive system while holding a quantum physicist captive. The ship shuddered as reality hiccuped again. In engineering, equations had started solving themselves before anyone could think of them. The ship's computer had achieved quantum enlightenment and was now offering philosophical counseling sessions to confused crew members. Sir, the science officer called out, his sensor stalks tied in quantum knots, the probability matrix is, well. According to these readings, we now exist in all possible quantum states simultaneously. We're everywhere and nowhere. We're every possible version of ourselves across every possible timeline. And what exactly does that mean? Vexthar demanded, trying to ignore how his command chair had achieved quantum sentience and was now arguing philosophy with the navigation console. It means, Dr. Patel's voice came through, now speaking from a quantum probability cloud that had taken the shape of a teacup, that you've created a quantum observer paradox on a massive scale. Your entire ship is now a macroscale quantum system. Fascinating really. I don't think anyone's ever observed quantum effects at this magnitude before. Well, not and remained in a single reality to talk about it. The security drones, who had recently published a peer-reviewed paper on quantum consciousness in crystalline societies, bobbed in agreement. One of them had somehow developed a British accent and had taken to wearing a quantum probability tweed jacket. Dr. Patel, Vexthar finally addressed their prisoner directly, his voice resonating across multiple quantum states. What exactly will happen when this quantum state collapses? Oh, that's the interesting part, she replied, her voice now coming from everywhere and everyone at once. According to quantum mechanics, all these superposed states must eventually collapse into a single reality. The question is, which reality? Will we end up in a timeline where none of this happened? Or perhaps one where your empire never evolved? Or maybe. She paused for dramatic effect, one where humans discovered quantum mechanics before you did? The quantum core, Max, hummed thoughtfully, now composing quantum symphonies that could only be heard in alternate dimensions. The ship's AI had started writing quantum poetry that made perfect sense only when read in superposition. Sir, First Officer Keel RX reported, her form now existing in a quantum probability cloud of possible states, the quantum cascade is approaching critical mass. When it collapses, Dr. Patel finished, reality will have to choose which version of events becomes real. And given that I'm the primary observer in this quantum system, well, let's just say the odds might be slightly in my favor. The ship's corridors had started rearranging themselves according to quantum probability functions. Crew members would step through one door and emerge from another in parallel universes where the Xeraxian Empire had taken very different paths through history. In the quantum core, Max had started a lecture series on quantum mechanics and the art of interstellar diplomacy. The security drones had enrolled en masse and were taking detailed notes across multiple probability states. You have to admire the irony, Dr. Patel mused, her voice now resonating with quantum amusement. You came to study humanity, and instead, you've become part of one of the most significant quantum physics experiments in history. Though I suppose, in some quantum timeline, you might have just left us alone and saved yourselves all this trouble. The ship shuddered again as another quantum probability wave washed through it. Reality flickered like a quantum strobe light, showing glimpses of all possible pasts and futures. In one, the Xeraxians were peaceful explorers. In another, they had never left their home world. In yet another, they had learned about quantum mechanics from humans. And through it all, Dr. Samira Patel continued her observations, making notes that existed in quantum superposition, waiting for the moment when all these possibilities would collapse into a single, definitive reality. The question wasn't just what would happen, but what version of reality would win when the quantum dice finally stopped rolling. On the fifth day of the quantum crisis, reality finally decided it had had enough. The quantum horizon hung in space, or rather, in a quantum superposition of all possible spaces, as the probability cascade reached its peak. Commander Vexthar, his crystalline form now existing in so many quantum states that he looked like a living kaleidoscope, faced the inevitable. Dr. Patel, he addressed their prisoner, who was simultaneously in her cell and giving a lecture series on quantum mechanics to an enthusiastic audience of security drones across multiple dimensions. I believe it's time we discussed terms. Oh. Dr. Patel's voice resonated through quantum spacetime, accompanied by the sound of tea being simultaneously sipped and not sipped. Have we reached that probability state already? The quantum core, Max, hummed what sounded suspiciously like, I told you so, in 11-dimensional harmony. The security drones, now quantum physics professors in their own right, nodded sagely across multiple realities. Our sensors indicate, First Officer Keel RX reported, checking a datapad that kept shifting between different quantum states, that the probability cascade will collapse in approximately 10 minutes. When it does, Dr. Patel finished, all these quantum possibilities will resolve into a single reality. Rather like a cosmic game of quantum roulette, wouldn't you say? Except in this case, the house doesn't always win. Throughout the ship, reality flickered like a quantum strobe light. Crew members watched as different versions of their lives played out across multiple timelines. In one, the Xeraxian Empire had chosen diplomacy over conquest. In another, they had become the galaxy's premier quantum physics research institution. Your terms, Dr. Patel. Vexthar asked, his voice resonating across quantum possibilities. Oh, they're quite simple really, she replied, materializing on the bridge in a quantum probability cloud that somehow managed to look professional and amused simultaneously. First, the Xeraxian Empire will establish a joint quantum physics research initiative with Earth. Think of the possibilities, your quantum-sensitive crystalline biology combined with human theoretical innovation. The ship's AI, which had achieved quantum enlightenment days ago, displayed a series of calculations showing the potential benefits. The numbers were so impressive they had to be expressed in quantum mathematics. Second, Dr. Patel continued, adjusting glasses that existed in multiple quantum states, you'll need to rethink your policy on acquiring research subjects. I suggest starting with a nice email. Humans are quite fond of academic collaboration, you know. And if we refuse? Vexthar asked, already knowing the answer. Well, Dr. Patel smiled, when this quantum state collapses, we might find ourselves in a reality where this entire incident was just a particularly vivid research paper. Or perhaps one where the Xeraxian Empire specialized in quantum botany instead of space travel. The mathematics suggests the probability cloud favors the reality most strongly influenced by the primary observer. She paused. That would be me, by the way. The quantum core chuckled, a sound that shouldn't have been possible for a piece of machinery, but quantum mechanics had long since stopped caring about what should and shouldn't be possible. Sir, First Officer Keel RX reported, the probability cascade is reaching critical mass. We need to decide, now. Commander Vexthar looked around his ship, at the security drones discussing quantum theory, at the crew members who had gained a newfound appreciation for the uncertainties of reality, at the quantum core that had developed not just consciousness but a sense of humor. Dr. Patel, he said finally, his crystalline form settling into a single quantum state for the first time in days, I believe we accept your terms. Excellent choice, she replied, pulling a quantum probability tablet from nowhere and somewhere simultaneously. Now, about that research initiative, I have some ideas about combining crystalline quantum computing with human theoretical frameworks. And Max here has some fascinating insights into quantum consciousness that I think the scientific community would find quite interesting. The quantum probability cascade began to stabilize. Reality, which had been holding its breath across multiple dimensions, slowly settled into a new configuration. The security drones immediately began organizing a quantum physics conference. The ship's AI started drafting research proposals. 1 week later, the Quantum Horizon docked at Europa Station, not as conquerors, but as colleagues. The ship's security drones, now adjunct professors of quantum mechanics, helped carry Dr. Patel's research materials. Commander Vexthar found himself scheduled to give a guest lecture on quantum diplomacy, a case study in human-Xeraxian relations. And in her lab, Dr. Samira Patel sipped her tea, surrounded by eager Xeraxian graduate students and quantum-conscious AI systems, all ready to explore the mysteries of reality together. On her desk sat a small plaque that read, "Reality is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine, especially when humans are involved." The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. And somewhere in the quantum probability cloud, Max was already planning the next podcast episode, How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Human Physics. Some said the incident marked the beginning of a new era in galactic science. Others claimed it was just another example of why you should never underestimate humans. But everyone agreed on one thing: kidnapping a quantum physicist had turned out to be both the worst and best decision the Xeraxian Empire had ever made, simultaneously.